All right, I think we will get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Ellie Johnston. I am the Director of Programs here at Climate Interactive. Also with me today is Eva De Leon, who is our Communications Coordinator. She's going to be on chat, helping to answer questions along the way. So feel free to send in messages to everyone on chat or to just host some panelists. And you can also submit your questions directly into the questions box, which is actually the best way for us to see it. And another note on just housekeeping things, we will be sending out the recording of this video tomorrow, along with a follow-up of resources. So as the chat picks up speed and different links and things are being shared, know that you will be able to access that afterwards if you look to your email tomorrow. And with that, I think we will begin. So this session today is focused on how to use the tools that we have developed at Climate Interactive in different kinds of educational settings, whether that's in the traditional classrooms for students of any age, or in outside traditional classrooms, whether that's a community education efforts or something else. We're going to go through a range of different formats that we have developed, and then we're also going to hear from some people who have experience using it themselves. One note, we have developed a lot of this work in partnership and collaborating with MIT Sloan School of Management, among many other different partners out there. There are a number of different academic institutions that we have different professors and representatives of that have been using this work in curriculum for years and years and years. And so there's a huge body in which we stand on and bring to sharing this, and are excited to be able to share some of it with you all today. As I said, we'll start with some context setting. Then I'm going to introduce you all to the main tool that we are sharing at Climate Interactive, the En-ROADS Climate Solutions Simulator. I'm going to then go through the different formats that we have out there to use, and then we're going to hear from two different educators who have used these tools in their work. At the end, I'll get to questions and answers, any kind of questions that Ava is not able to handle along the way. Also, I'm sure listening in are many people who have a lot of experience using En-ROADS, so feel free to jump into the chat and share your experiences as we go along too. Thanks everyone for being here, and I want to start actually just before even diving in. So we're going to cover these 4 different formats, but I wanted to ask you all, who here has seen En-ROADS? How are you all familiar with this work, or is it new to you? And I would imagine we probably have a whole range here today. So to do this, we're going to use this polling software just for a quick poll. Visit pollev.com/climateinter935. Ava will drop the link to that in the chat, so look for it there and you can just click on it. And have you seen a presentation or used En-ROADS before today? Let the votes come in, and just to kind of get a sense of who's in the room today and who's with us. We have a big group joining, and I know many of you all are coming from all different corners of the world. I'm coming here from Western North Carolina. Ava is down in Miami, Florida. We have colleagues, and Climate Interactive works around the world. So it looks like about 75% of you, 3/4, have seen En-ROADS before and used it, and we are welcoming another 25% of you or so who are totally new to this. That is awesome, and I'm excited to see that and share some more with you all. So just to ground us too in the long history of use of this, so we track whenever you all report to us that you use these tools in your classes and in different educational settings, we register that and keep track. To date, We estimate that there are over 6,700 classes and events that have used the tools that we'll be talking about today in different educational settings worldwide. This is also in combination with all the uses of these tools in settings beyond education. We really design a lot of this work to be decision useful. So to be used with decision makers in government settings, in the private sector. And so there's many more events that have happened worldwide that are going straight to people in different professional settings. Over 406,000 participants of events, somewhat like what we're participating in today, in almost all countries. We still have a few more countries to cover. Of the 196 or so countries of the world, we've gotten to 173 of them. That's pretty exciting. If you are looking at this map and see that you're in a country that maybe doesn't have a pin where an event has been held, we would love to have you join us and add that pin to the map. Or else just please help fill in all of these gaps where we already have crowded spaces. So just a few quotes from professors around the world who have been using tools like En-ROADS. This is Ratna Lubis, who's a professor in Indonesia, and she says, really, that En-ROADS presents the users with vast possibilities for interpersonal conversation, informational exchange, and learning. She says, I get a sense of satisfaction that makes me love what I do and share this with my students. Another professor down in Buenos Aires, Argentina, Maria, says, I believe that the En-ROADS simulator is a fantastic tool for training the professionals that our world needs today, especially in this decisive decade to combat climate change. And to give us some context of what we're working with, and I am sure many of you all know why it is so important and it's bringing you here today because you care about this topic and you care about using good tools in your teaching practice, whatever that may look like. There was a UNESCO study that was done last year, and they surveyed national curriculums across many different countries. And of the 100 national curriculums they looked at, 47% of them did not mention climate change at all. And when they talked to teachers, they found that only 33% of teachers felt able to effectively explain the effects of climate change. And talking to young people, 70% of young people say they haven't been taught enough about climate change. And at the same time, teachers, students, they believe that climate change is occurring and see this as a necessary way to address it. We have to equip people with the dynamics shaping our future world. And this is all in contrast to where we sit with climate change today. So this is a graph from 1880 to 2024, and it's showing how temperature has deviated from the mean average that was between 1881 and 1990. And what you see here is that in 2024, the very last line here on the far right, we hit 1.5 degrees Celsius of deviating from that line. And you can see just this steady climb that is reflected here in the last 30, 35, 40 years or so, where it's just dramatically, we've seen temperatures climbing, not to mention the decades previous to that. So we have to stay aware of what's going on. And one of the foundational things that motivates a lot of our work at Climate Interactive is around not just leaving the discussion about climate change here and showing the state of the world as it is, but we really are building tools to set people up to see the possibility for action, to be able to play out scenarios and say, what if we choose a better trajectory? What does it take to address climate change? And keeping that grounded in the best available science. So it's not just sort of this fantastical exercise, but it is an exercise of future hope and possibility grounded in what we know and what the science says is possible. And that's where I bring in En-ROADS. So this is the tool that I'm going to spend the most time talking about today. It's our climate solutions simulator. And we built it, again, in collaboration with MIT Sloan School of Management. What you're looking at here is the dashboard, the main screen of En-ROADS. On the left, you have global sources of primary energy. At the bottom is coal, then in red is oil, then gas, natural gas, or methane gas, and blue. Green is renewables, bioenergy is there in pink, and there's a thin blue line at the top reflecting nuclear energy. This is reflecting the mix of energy, the sources of energy that our world uses. Here in 2025, you can see the mix today, and showing what it looks like in 2100 if we follow what's called our baseline scenario. Our baseline scenario, this is if we continue with kind of the existing circumstances of our world. There is some action on climate change, some signs of progress. And what if that was to continue outward without necessarily assuming great steps to increase that level of ambition? And you see what that gets is, renewable energy is growing steadily, but there's still this mix of other sources of energy. The fossil fuels, coal, oil, and gas, they are large sources of greenhouse gas emissions. They produce a lot of carbon dioxide. And that's what's then reflected here on this right graph. Greenhouse gas net emissions. This is all global. You see here that level of greenhouse gas net emissions has been rising up through today, and we see that leveling off, but it's not coming down in this baseline scenario. That's where the policies and actions that we can play out here in the control panel come to really make a difference. On this trajectory of greenhouse gas emissions, it would lead to a world where in 2100, the rise in temperature would be about 3.3 degrees Celsius. In terms of Fahrenheit, that's about 6 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's the landscape of things. And then the way En-ROADS works is we can test and we can say, well, what if we dramatically reduce deforestation? And so I can pull this slider and you can see that the simulator adjusts and greenhouse gas net emissions fall. Now, we didn't see any kind of change here in terms of sources of primary energy because we're talking about deforestation. We cut down trees. A lot of times those trees that are cut down are burned, or at some point they decompose, and that carbon dioxide from that decomposition or the combustion of them ends up in the atmosphere. So if we stop deforestation, that helps to bring those emissions down, bringing down global temperature a little bit. So that's how the tool works. I'll come back to this later, but I wanted to introduce that to you as I'm talking about some of the different formats we have. And as you're an educator listening in, and you're thinking about what you want to try out and test out, the first one that I'm going to touch on is our En-ROADS assignment. Sometimes we call it the guided assignment. It's essentially a homework assignment that you can assign to your students. It can be done in class or it can be as a take-home activity. And what it entails is we have two different versions of it, a short version and a long version. And the students are tasked with opening up En-ROADS, just like I did, and looking around and making a scenario that they think or that they see in the tool will successfully address climate change. And then there's some questions that prompt them to reflect on the scenario that they've just made. Why do they think it's possible? What are some of the potential co-benefits of some of the different types of actions that they're exploring? For example, I moved the slider that said was for deforestation. They could talk about, oh, well, when we stop cutting down trees, it benefits greenhouse gas emissions, and it also protects biodiversity. And it also protects maybe people who use that land in other ways. So the exercise enables them to discuss that and share more details. It could be done as a group or as an individual activity. And for you, as an educator, it's pretty low prep. We have some videos. We have a 10-minute video as well as an hour-long video that you could assign the students to watch to give them a background on En-ROADS, and then turn them loose and see what they come back with to discuss. We would love to hear how people adapt this along all the tools I'm going to talk about today. They're free. They're open source in the sense that you're allowed to change them, modify them, do what you want to serve your learning objectives, as well as kind of meet your students at whatever level you have them at. So that's the guided assignment. The next, oh, and then here's just a quote from a professor at Rutgers University in New Jersey who has used the guided assignment and said that one of the students in their final review and evaluation of the class said, one of the most valuable interfaces over the course of the semester was En-ROADS. So even just the assignment left a lasting impact on that student. The next format we have is the Climate Solutions Workshop. And this format is, I would say, probably the most popular way in which En-ROADS gets used in lots of settings. When I showed that number 6,500 events, a lot of those events are variations on the Climate Solutions Workshop. The way this works is you have a group, and actually I'm going to demonstrate a little bit for us, so I'll explain more. But the overall idea is that you learn how different climate policies and actions influence global temperature and climate impacts. The way it's set up is that you set up the challenge. Okay, today we're going to address climate change. Today we're going to achieve the targets laid out in the Paris Climate Agreement. And to do that, ask people, well, which approaches do you think make the biggest impact on climate? Take some ideas from people, test those ideas in En-ROADS, keep building on those ideas, taking more and more inputs until you reach the goal. Then you can reflect or have a call to action, whatever is most appropriate for the setting you're working in. And people can take away from that this whole picture, a whole scenario of what it takes to address climate change. So just as an example of how this would work, let me go back to En-ROADS. I moved the deforestation slider earlier. I'll just leave that for our purposes right now. But I'm going to go back to Poll Everywhere. So if you could drop the link to Poll Everywhere back into the chat so everyone has that. And the question is, which climate solution do you think will have the biggest impact on reducing temperature change? Looks like there are over 275 people here on this webinar, so we have a lot of people. Polls are an excellent way to solicit input and make this interactive when you're working with a lot of people. Obviously, if you've got a class, you're in person, you can have people just raising their hands and calling on them and proposing lots of different topics. So I'm going to scroll through here as you all are weighing in. We have encourage renewable energy, 16% of the votes coming in for that. Oh, 30% of people voting for setting a carbon price. That seems to be a popular one. Also, a lot of people voting for reducing methane and other greenhouse gases. But you see interest in a lot of different topics. Discouraging coal, ranking pretty highly as well. All right, and increasing energy efficiency in buildings and industry. Well, the resounding favorite of you all voting in was to say setting a carbon price. So let's just do that as an example. And if I was running a full workshop, I would probably jot down on a piece of paper the list of the top 3 to 5, and then I would go through each one by one. But just to take a look at a carbon price, and I will add the carbon price on top of this deforestation action that we already took. So the idea here of a carbon price, what this policy would do is that it's saying that for any source of carbon dioxide, there would be a price to release that carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Currently, there are a lot of carbon prices around the world, but not everywhere. So in many places, say a power plant that runs on natural gas, if they're releasing a lot of that if they're releasing carbon dioxide by burning the natural gas, then they might not be paying for that release of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, even though we are, in a sense, paying for all of that carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, people around the world, through the impacts that we experience. So it's a way of kind of counterbalancing. The principle is that the polluter should pay to release the carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And so we could set this at any level. And as you are thinking about how to use a simulator with the students or the audiences that you work with, there's different levels and ways to approach it. One way would just be to stay on this main screen and not go changing too many things around in terms of the graphs or going into the advanced views. But for other audiences, this could be where you get into a lot of really interesting conversations. So here I can go under and I can say, well, I want to know what the exact number is for that carbon price. You see that actually the carbon price is already set at $5 per ton of CO2. That's because there are so many carbon prices that already exist around the world. If we globally average it out, it equals about $5 per ton CO2. But we could change that, and we can make that much higher. And then the next thing that I'll do is ask you all to mentally simulate. We all have kind of our mental models. You all proposed a bunch of different actions in terms of what you thought would be the most effective in addressing climate change. That was revealing some of your mental models and thinking, like, what are the ideas based on your experience, your expertise, anything that you're bringing to the table about this. And the way a simulator works, we work really hard to ground it in the best available science. We're pulling in data from sources like the International Energy Agency, the World Bank, synthesizing it into a tool that is designed for you to use so that you don't have to comb through all of those different research reports and pull it together yourself. So I'll ask before I move many sliders, what do you think the impact is going to be? So for a carbon price, if I move this, say, halfway, which would lead to a carbon price around $150 per ton, what would that do to greenhouse gas emissions? And you could say it out loud. Sometimes I might have people turn to the person beside them and verbally say it. Here, you guys can just do it without me asking. But there you see, things change quite notably. And the other thing I'll do is hit this button at the top to replay the change, because sometimes people aren't paying attention. They were looking away. And if you replay the change, you can show that difference. So we went from 3.2 degrees to 2.6 degrees. And on the left graph here, if you draw your attention to what's changing most substantially, the thing my eye is drawn to is at the bottom there for coal. You see that before we did this policy, coal was kind of flat, and it was still a steady part of the energy mix till the end of the century. With that carbon price, it begins to fall immediately, and it's at a much lower level than it would be otherwise. That's because coal is one of the most carbon intensive types of energy. When you burn coal, it produces a lot of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, that if there's a carbon price and that producer of coal power has to pay to release all of that carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, it's really disincentivizes them from doing it, and they might consider switching to other forms of energy. So that's just as an example. If I was to continue this further, I would go through many more different sliders and see if we could create a picture that really got global greenhouse gas emissions down and keep that temperature as low as possible. We don't have time for that today, so I'm going to go back to the slides and talk through more of these different formats to give you a flavor of what you can do with this simulator. So the third approach that we have is the climate action simulation role play game. So building on what we do with the workshop, this is a bit more in depth. Generally, we run it from 2 to 3 hours, but I know professors who really like to take upwards of 4 hours or divide this experience across multiple class sessions. Say if you're only working with 1 hour at a time, you could break it across 2 or 3 different classes. And the way the climate action simulation works is that you have groups that are representing different stakeholder interests. And then they have a briefing statement that gives them some background and context on what their role is. And then they're asked to make proposals for the types of climate solutions that would best reflect the interest of their stakeholder group. So it enables participants to either set aside their personal opinions, or if they don't have necessarily a lot of opinions about these climate solutions, learn about them and learn about the different stakeholder interests that are at play, and get to role play it. It's a lot of fun, and as well gets people into some really heated conversations. So these are the 6 different groups that will oftentimes divide people into. We also have a bunch of additional types of briefing statements. So you can bring in finance, for example, or divide the world governments group out into different regional groups, if that's more useful. And people have written their own briefing statements and brought them in based on the interests of whatever they're trying to get out of the class with their group. Then these groups will meet individually in breakouts, and then when they come up with their position, either like a UN Secretary General, facilitator, or a convener will call the groups back together and then ask them to present and share what they think, share one policy per round for each of the different stakeholder groups, what they would propose in terms of a global climate strategy. It's a whole lot of fun, and can be really dynamic. Sometimes it's run with facilitator teams. So you'll have one person who's maybe managing the En-ROADS itself and moving the different sliders as groups propose them. And you might have another person who's playing that UN Secretary General figure, and you can run it yourself, by yourself as well. But to do this, as well as for the workshop, we have a whole training that you can work through. We call it Mastering En-ROADS. Ava can drop a link into the chat. And this is a training that people can take on your own time, or usually once a year we'll have a dedicated time where people can all go through the training together as a cohort, and it will be paired with some live sessions. That can really ground you in all the different dynamics of En-ROADS. You saw very briefly what I showed, that there were tons of different sliders, as well as different ways to use it and pull up and explain what's going on. And we really encourage people to get familiar with that as they dive in. And then the very last approach that we have is the World Climate Simulation role play game. So this is using another tool that we have built at Climate Interactive, the C-ROADS Climate Simulator. So instead of, you just saw the interface of En-ROADS, which looks at the world by different types of policy and action interventions that we might make, stopping deforestation, implementing a carbon price, things like energy efficiency and electric cars. C-ROADS instead looks at the world by regions and countries. And so we've divided the world into 6 different groups. And so the World Climate Simulation enables people to play what is essentially a mock UN climate negotiation, where people are representing different nations or different groups, and then proposing different emission reduction pledges that are then put into the C-ROADS simulator, tested. You can propose things like emissions peak year, when those reductions will begin. And the added layer that's part of the role play, that's not reflected actually in the simulator itself, but is an additional learning outcome of the World Climate Simulation, is around climate finance and the differing responsibilities that some countries may have, who have, to take the United States, for example. The United States is historically the biggest contributor to greenhouse gases. So then there can be a whole dialogue about what responsibility, how much the US has to help supporting other countries in this challenge of addressing climate change. So that's the World Climate Simulation. It's a lot of fun. It's our oldest tool that we have had for use in educational settings. We've been running it for over a decade and has been used in many, many different settings. So also just to give you some confidence, we are sure that this works because we've researched it. Here's a paper written led by our colleague Juliette Rooney Varga, who's at the University of Massachusetts Lowell. This is from a few years ago, but she studied participants of the World Climate Simulation specifically and found that 83% of the participants reported that they were more likely to take action. They looked across a whole number of different things by doing pre and post surveys of participants, and in some cases following up with them with some time after they had experienced it, just to see if they remembered participating in the event. And it turned out too that it was also a very memorable experience. When a student thinks back on a semester of classes, they might not remember that one lecture that might have just been a PowerPoint, but when they start talking to their fellow students and role playing, that creates a very vivid memory that sticks with students for some time afterwards, which is pretty cool. So these are the 4 different types of formats we have. And so now I want to pause and I want to turn it over to a couple people who have been using En-ROADS in classes and in different educational settings to share a little bit about their experience and some of the powerful moments and what they have learned along the way. So with me today is Anjali and Susan. And why don't we start with Anjali? Introduce yourself, tell us where you are, and then we'll go to Susan.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Ellie. I hope everybody can hear me. I'm really excited to be here. I learned about En-ROADS a few years ago, and it really aligns with my teaching philosophy that you cannot really teach climate literacy. You have to create opportunities and experiences that allow people to experience climate action and then figure out ways to find solutions. I'm trying to share my slides. Okay, here we go. Thank you. And Ellie, I promise I'll be brief. Just a quick disclaimer, I'm not an environmental scientist. I did go through the Climate Ambassador training through Climate Interactive, and every time it is offered, I go through the process because that is one very important way in which I stay current. And then it's not a linear process for me, and I know everybody's journey is different, but I've said yes to literally everything that comes my way when they talk about, do you want to talk about climate literacy? And that's what I have been doing. I feel that En-ROADS is available to all kinds of people, skeptics, people who are stressed, and people who are overly optimistic about how they are going to do it, because it helps me make 3 fundamental facts. One, we are in climate emergency. You know, through the historical data, you can see what has been happening, which has led to this global greenhouse gases and the temperature. It also shows how human action, if it's taken, that we can make some headway, and what are some of the actions that we can take. So I feel like En-ROADS allows me to appeal to people in terms of their heads, their hearts, and their hands, because they're actually testing things out. So a few years ago, when I became a climate ambassador, obviously, I was not very comfortable about how to go about and do it. And I also wanted to know if this works. Is this the best tool I can use? And so what I did is I just contacted all the faculty members and said, could I please have some class time? And I just ran En-ROAD workshop. Either I did a game, mostly I did the game. And then I had students fill out a survey before I did the workshop and after I did the workshop. And now I have an amazing data set because I've done it in US, I've done it in Spain. And the pre and post survey shows significant change in students' understanding, how they feel about it, what they're willing to do, their knowledge about it, except for donating money. They were willing to do a lot of things, such as contact government officials and all. And so me and my co-authors are writing it up, and hopefully we'll submit it to a journal and able to share that with others. So again, my experience might be different than yours. I just want to share what I am doing, and hopefully you can figure out a ways of integrating En-ROADS in your own academic and other affiliations. So again, MBA students, PhD students, undergrads. I even got invited at a high school, and the sixth graders were crushing it. People, sixth graders were crushing it. It was really awesome to see. So the next step, when I got all this confidence, was to figure out how can I educate the trainers. And that was interesting because people who care about teaching about sustainability and climate literacy all have their pet tools and pedagogies. And so what I would do is I would invite them to my own sessions, and to see that level of engagement really made a lot of difference. And then after that, it was either giving them one-on-one training or hand-holding when they were doing it, facilitating with them. But I always recommended that they go through the Mastering En-ROADS course, because really those videos, I still use them when I want to brush up on certain things. And that is something that I recommend that they do. I've written up how to use En-ROADS for management faculty. And then I also write about it in practitioner setting, like in Forbes, where how we can take some action, how we can use En-ROADS in our own life, as well as for managers in terms of helping them tackle eco-anxiety. And I'm happy to share any of these articles that I'm mentioning to you. Okay, this is where it gets tricky. Organizations, because you just don't know who you're going to come across, right? They're captive audience, but they're coming with all kinds of mindsets. And I'm still not the level that Ellie or Drew Jones are to be able to do it in a way that I feel comfortable. And so that's where I feel like there are certain things I look at before I make a decision. Games come naturally because we are talking about a serious topic. It helps make some very important points in a very controlled setting, but it will depend on who your audience is, how much time you have, how big is the audience, whether you have a co-facilitator. I mean, I cannot say enough about times when I've had an En-ROADS climate ambassador to help me. And finally, in-person versus virtual. I used to be all about in-person, but virtual has been a pretty phenomenal thing that I've been experiencing. And mainly because we have such good resources on Climate Interactive, whether it's the briefing sheets or whether it's your Zoom backgrounds, it's so easy to make that environment possible that I thought I would not be able to do in a virtual setting. What else? There are many grants out there for climate literacy. I just received one, and I'll be using En-ROADS to help students understand how they can take leadership, especially among minority populations. So this was a grant that was given by the US government along with Amazon. And then it's a partnership between Mexico and Canada. So I have students working with my students on an online experience, and then they will be teaching the En-ROADS or what they have understood in a game format when they visit Chicago and in front of invited audience, mostly high school students. But that has been very rewarding. And so there are those opportunities out there, not always linear. But anyway, that's all. I know I don't want to go over my time. So over to you, Ellie.
Thanks so much, Anjali. And what that laid out so clearly too is just the variety of different formats that are possible once you become skilled and experienced in using the tool. You can find all sorts of interesting ways in which to find, in Anjali's case, highlighting research opportunities, funding opportunities, and also just opportunities to get in front of new groups, whether that's high school students or organizations. So thanks so much for sharing that. Susan, I want to turn it over to you. Can you share a little bit about what your experience has been using En-ROADS in different educational settings?
Thank you, Ellie. I co-lead a team of volunteer guest lecturers on the climate crisis for the Citizens Climate Lobby in Alameda, California. We work with instructors in colleges and senior levels of high schools to design interactive learning sessions such as the ones that Ellie discussed. The goal is to inform and spur students to become actively engaged in strategies to control or mitigate global warming. After short introductions about the dynamics of climate change, global agreements, and progress to date, we introduce En-ROADS. We use it in several ways. We've used the Global Climate Action Simulation, especially for classes with a global focus. For smaller classes, we condense the groups into three, one representing the Global South, low-income countries, one representing emerging economy countries such as India, China, and Brazil, and then one representing high-income countries and including oil-producing nations. We've also used a variant we developed for US-based interest groups. This was primarily for high schools that had, say, civics classes or government classes. They could be adapted for any country, really. So we divided them up into different types of groups. In this case, we had Senator Amy Klobuchar chairing the session instead of the head of the UN. And we had one group representing fossil fuel companies and the industries that rely on them. We had one group representing farmers and ag business, one group for city managers, clean tech companies, and climate hawks. And then asked them to try to form a consensus for climate action after various rounds of developing their own proposals and then interacting with the other groups. One thing that was very entertaining was when we told them one of their actions could be undoing an action that the other group proposed. It led to a lot of dynamism in the group. For all of those simulations, I have the scenarios and assignments for each group, and if people are interested, I can share them later in the chat. More recently, we had some classes in which each small group tried to achieve the temps below 2 degrees by 2100, but each group was given different constraints. For instance, one group might be told to achieve a reduction in global warming to below 2 degrees and then try to maintain it if they do not start these interventions before 2035. This really gave them a powerful sense of what delaying would do to our total climate picture. Another group may be tasked to identify 5 actions that make the most impact on global warming, and then focus on the impact that those actions would have on most vulnerable groups with brainstorming on how to mitigate harm to these groups. This approach means that each small group is presenting new ideas to the others, which creates very thoughtful plenary discussions. And we found, especially when we had limited class time, maybe only 2 sessions, that it was good to raise all of these thoughts from the groups themselves rather than trying to keep asking each group about things like equity. Similar to what Ellie said at the beginning, and also Anjali, at the beginning of these sessions, most students say they know that global warming is a huge problem, but they often express fatalism or apathy since they feel powerless. By the end of the sessions, pretty much all students express more confidence that there are still potential solutions and that they understand it will take national and international efforts and multiple interventions. Some of them express strong interest in getting involved in climate exercises. So I found it extremely interesting, and I think the students, from what they say at the end of the class, have as well. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Susan. That's fascinating and so great to learn about just the ways in which you all have adapted it. And also noting, of course, too, as Susan said, she's with the Citizen Climate Lobby. And so it's outside of a formal teaching role. But then, and actually, Susan, if you just would say a few words about some of your approach to finding classes, and are you all just reaching out directly to schools and saying, hey, we're here to run events, or kind of what's your approach there?
You put your finger on probably the hardest task for our team, is to getting into new institutions. We have some regulars who keep calling us back, either in local colleges or in high schools, but we tend to try to use them as a way to approach more instructors. We would do more if we had more opportunities to engage. So it is a constraint. I think word of mouth among instructors among institutions. There are some groups of climate educators that we can interact with, but that's a challenge.
Yeah. Well, all right. If you're sitting out there near Alameda, California, contact Susan and you've got a team that could just drop into your class. What a great resource that is. And that brings up a great point too, which is that both Susan and Anjali are En-ROADS climate ambassadors. And so we have on our website a whole directory of all of the En-ROADS climate ambassadors around the world who have gone through the training and then are out there running events. In many cases, you can just contact them. And especially if you see someone near you in the area, this can be, as Anjali flagged, it's an opportunity to collaborate with co-facilitators as you're preparing events and getting up to speed. Or it could be, maybe you don't have time to go through the training. We get it. We're busy. There's so many different opportunities in lots of different areas. Have someone like Susan and her team come in and just run it for you. So you don't have to worry about all of the prep. There are possibilities out there. Also, if you look at our En-ROADS Climate Ambassador page and you don't see somebody near you and you would like to work with someone, you can also contact us at Climate Interactive. We play matchmaker plenty and we'll connect you with see if we can find somebody that can work with you. And especially if you have if you are in the educational setting, but also looking beyond at opportunities, we have a number of facilitators that are always really eager to reach business settings and settings where we can inform decision makers as a big part of that. Let me go back to my slides here, share my screen again. And just speaking to that En-ROADS Climate Ambassador Program, the way to get involved, and I really hope that there are some of you sitting there that are thinking, I think that could be me. This sounds so fascinating. I want to dig in more. There's a lot more here. So if you're interested in taking this path to become an En-ROADS Climate Ambassador, diving in deep into the resources we have this training program. I mentioned it earlier. You can access it yourself, sign up, it's free to follow along. Others on our team, our executive director, Drew Jones, have made dozens of videos. We've created a ton of quizzes to try and make it interactive as you go through it, where you can really absorb on all of the different topics that the simulator covers, some of the different dynamics, the different talking points. You don't have to have a background in this stuff to pick it up. We've tried really hard to build something that can be approachable to people regardless of where they're coming from. So check out the training program if that's of interest to you, and then you could become an En-ROADS Climate Ambassador, which brings us towards the top of the hour. And I know the chat has been really active with a bunch of questions and that kind of thing. Ava has been looking at your questions. She's been helping to answer a bunch of them. And I want to make sure we have some time to touch on the things that you all want us to hear about. And note, we probably will not be able to get to all of your questions. If you have a specific question, you can reach out to us. support@climateinteractive.org is the email address. We'll do our best to get back to you. There's so many possibilities out there around where this can get used. And we do our best to share that with others as much as we can. So Ava, over to you. What are some of the questions that you have seen come up? And while Ava's preparing that, one note, I did see a question about languages. So big note, En-ROADS is available in 20 different languages here. You can see the very newest language we added last month was Czech. So here, now it's available, and you can use it if you speak Czech. But we have 20, so I think that brings us actually up to 21 languages. Maybe I need to update that, but you can see the simulator itself available in many different languages, and the materials that we have developed to accompany these different formats that I've talked about, in many cases are translated too. Not in all languages, but in languages like Spanish and French, a lot of these materials are available as well. So do look around if you are working with students where it would be best to do it in a different language. Okay, Ava, what kind of questions are you seeing come in that would be good to touch on?
We have a couple questions in the Q&A. We'll start off with Chris's question. He asked how to address skeptical participants. Say someone notes that some news reports say temperature rise will be only 2 degrees Celsius versus En-ROAD's baseline. How would you handle that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of varieties of where people come from with skeptical types of questions. Of course, as we're watching global news right now, particularly for those of us sitting in the US, it's a wild ride right now in terms of the conversation around climate change. And it can lead to a lot of people who are just genuinely confused because of all the different things that they're hearing. And so we, in terms of our facilitation approach that we encourage people to use and how we handle things at Climate Interactive, is really to be open to the questions when they're genuine. So if somebody says, hey, I heard climate change was only going to 2 degrees, but I see in your simulator it's going to 3.3. Sometimes it's helpful just to know what their source is. Say, oh, well, where'd you hear that? And on that question specifically, there have been these announcements that say, all right, world on track to 2 degrees based on, current policies. And actually, what we are oftentimes doing, because we also have this baseline scenario, is looking at what are the assumptions of a scenario like that. So if a scenario is heading towards 2 degrees, then what is necessarily required to achieve that? You saw in our very brief little demo where I took deforestation back and I implemented a carbon price. We got to 2.6. Maybe we boost renewables and we boost energy efficiency and scale up electric transport. You can see it comes down. So if a report is saying, oh, well, we're on track to 2 degrees, my thinking would be, well, they are very hopeful about the state of global climate policy. And it is a rather optimistic scenario that the good progress that has been happening on climate will continue to pick up speed, as if there was like some big snowball effect that would then lead towards 2 degrees and make it so that we achieve the Paris climate targets. By and large, that's not the situation I see ourselves sitting in. And it's going to take a whole lot of active work from the private sector, from government policies, from citizen activists, working really hard to push on all of these different levers to make a 2 degree scenario possible. Even with just the few sliders I've pulled here. Deforestation, let's see. We can click on the title itself and that pops up a miniature graph down here of deforestation. Or I can also go and search for that graph under our land, forestry, and food and look at deforestation. So when I move that slider for deforestation to highly reduce it, such that it's reducing 10% per year, that means by the middle of the century, we have really substantially gotten rid of the global deforestation. What would it take to do that globally? It would take a lot of leadership from those countries where deforestation is happening. So may it be so. I really, really hope and am all for supporting all the efforts and initiatives out there that make these scenarios possible. And that, I think, is the hard work ahead of us. So that's part of the conversation. And when we get different kinds of questions, it's that inquiry, what's behind it, and then really unpacking and exploring, like, okay, what can we understand by looking at the simulator here? What do you have next, Ava?
I think one question that might be helpful for the group, someone's asking about the ambassador training, if you just have to take the training, or are there other steps to becoming an ambassador?
Yeah, so I'll just show you all on our website. So you can read more about the ambassador program if you're curious. Go under our work about the program, ambassador program. And if I scroll down here, you can see there's a few steps. Just one, you go through the training, get yourself equipped in the background of En-ROADS, ask for feedback, start running some practice sessions. We always encourage people to start with maybe some of their friends or family. It doesn't have to be a big group. It could just be 1 or 2 people where you open the tool and start talking about it with somebody. And then to become an ambassador, one of the real key pieces is that you run at least 2 events and then you register them with us. Anytime you use En-ROADS, we really ask you to please register your events. That's how I got that big number. 6,500 plus classes and events have used En-ROADS in educational settings. That's inspiring to this whole community of people that are out there using it. It's inspiring to us that are building it, helps build the case to the funders who help support our work. Necessarily, we're a nonprofit. We can't do this entirely for free. And so we're always looking for ways in which to be able to highlight just the impact and be reassured that this is working as an approach out there. So register events, and then you can apply to become an En-ROADS Climate Ambassador yourself. And then to maintain, to stay an ambassador, you just have to run 2 events each year, and then that we will feature you on in our ambassador directory. And here you can see some of the many faces around the world who are ambassadors, and you can search this page by country, by language, by audience type, by the different event types I described earlier, to find facilitators and people who are comfortable facilitating that. And feel free to just contact us too. If you sometimes, I know people's inboxes can be a mess. So if you contact a bunch of ambassadors and you don't hear from them, let us know, and we'll try and help you out. Other questions, Ava?
Looks like most of the questions have been answered. So if anyone has any more, feel free to drop them in the Q&A or the chat.
Yeah, I see a note here, just as a reminder, if you joined late and you missed the beginning, we will be sending out a recording of this session tomorrow, as well as a follow-up email that will include some of the key links to these different resources. So in case you missed them in the chat, we will send them out in an email tomorrow, and you're welcome to rewatch the recording of this webinar. So no worries there.
See a question from Laura asking, are there different versions of the assignments, maybe by student age?
We have 2 of the assignment. We have 2 versions. So let me show you the En-ROADS guided assignment. And I would say the way I do generally think of it is the shorter version. It's a little more accessible to younger students. The longer version has some more detailed questions. But you can open them up and check it out. We have the Word documents available, so feel free to also just edit it to tailor it to your audience. But here, I'll just give you a quick preview of the types of questions that exist within the student assignment. So it's like, the first thing is just your plan. Have the students come up with their own scenario by moving the sliders of En-ROADS. They can then grab the scenario link, copy scenario link, or just grab it from the URL bar there, and then paste it into their response. Then there's a question about political feasibility and what types of actions would be needed to make their scenario possible. And then thinking about winners or losers, who might benefit from this, who might be hurt by a range of the different policies, and surprises, hope. Again, cater it to the audience as you see fit. You can cut it back and simplify it further if you would like, or the other version of the En-ROADS guided assignment here, this longer version. I believe it was originally written for graduate level students, but it's totally accessible to non-graduate students. So don't let that stop you. We've worked to try and make it approachable but you will find it to be a little more involved, requiring a little bit more reading, and asking participants to do a write-up. So they write a little memo about their plan, addressing some of the different goals, thinking about climate, how might the economy be affected by the proposals that they've put forward? What about equity? What about different other types of impacts, like other environmental impacts, biodiversity, air quality? How might that play into it, as well as more of those different questions? So yeah, two different approaches. Use it however you like, and don't hesitate to send us feedback on what's working or what's not. It's always helpful for us to learn just how people are finding this and how it's meeting the moment, especially as students really grapple with the context in which they're facing climate change today. All right, other questions? I see some good ones that were already covered in the chat. There's a mention there of reaching companies, so in different kinds of capacity building, educational environments well beyond schools. We do a lot of events. Like I said, En-ROADS itself is designed to be decision useful, and so can really help people very quickly get up to speed on the possibility for taking climate action. There's a whole lot of, sometimes it's just noise, a whole lot of discussion out there around which climate solutions are needed. Sometimes everyone has their favorite and they'll wave and can sometimes make that seem like the end all be all. Our conclusion, and one of the big takeaways from using En-ROADS that users have, is that there's not one single solution that does it. Acting on climate change takes a whole range of different actions, activities across a lot of different sectors. There are certainly some strategies that are more effective than others, and you can explore those different dynamics. But we try and make this tool such that people explore that for themselves. Some of you all may be wondering, well, just give us the best scenario, or give us your favorite scenario. And we always try and dodge that question and send people a link to the simulator themselves, say, play with it, come up with the scenario that you prefer, because my preferred solution is not necessarily yours. And fortunately, there are many different paths to addressing climate change. It takes a lot of us working in a lot of different ways at a lot of different levels. And the other thing too is that there's a lot of momentum behind this. So that's the other parting context here. See, we've just gone over the top of the hour, but when it comes to something like renewable energy, we see that there's a lot of momentum in the system. So we're building it, and one of the, if you want to get into the different graphs, we have a whole variety of different graphs that look at a bunch of different topics, but there's this one graph, marginal cost of solar electricity history. This actually is a static graph. Most of the graphs, as you move sliders, you'll see them change, but this one is static, and it's just there for reference, to remind people of where we've come in just the last, say, 30 years or so. Back in 1990, the cost of solar electricity was well over $1, almost $1.50. And you can see that over time, this is IEA actual data there, that pink jagged line picking up data from some other sources. En-ROADS baseline following along that trajectory. This is how we recreate history. But you can see the cost of solar electricity has plummeted, such that regardless of subsidies and things like that, it just makes sense to build this because it's financially, it's a good strategy. So there are stories like that give us indications of the possibility for really making the difference that's needed. And of course, we know time is not in our favor on this topic. We face impacts today. I live in Western North Carolina, just down the road from me. We still have so much destruction from Hurricane Helene in this community, and Meanwhile, we have fires out in California. Unfortunately, there are actually also fires here in North Carolina today, and all over the world. So this is such an urgent topic, and I am just glad to be with you all today and hear all your good ideas, see the chat so active, and I'm excited to see where you run with this and take this into all kinds of different environments. So thank you so much for being here. We'll wrap up here. I'm going to scroll through the chat and questions, see if there is anything else we missed. But yeah, I hope for those of you who are part of that 25% that are just seeing En-ROADS for the first time, I hope this is the beginning of many more webinars and events in which you find this tool useful in your work. Thanks, everyone, and take care out there.